The world you know almost ended on October 20, 1962. It wasn't in a presidential bunker or a military command center. The Cold War had reached its absolute boiling point. The United States had discovered Soviet nuclear missile sites in Cuba, just a stone's throw from its shores. President John F. Kennedy responded with a naval quarantine, a blockade to stop any more Soviet ships. Premier Nikita Khrushchev refused to back down. Across the globe, military were at their highest alert. Intercontinental ballistic missiles were fueled and ready. Strategic bombers, armed with nuclear payloads, were already in the air, circling, waiting for the order that would plunge the world into atomic fire. But the moment that truly mattered, the real tipping point, was happening far from the eyes of the world. Deep underwater, the B-59, a diesel-electric submarine, was trapped. It was designed for stealthy patrols in the cold Arctic, not for being submerged for days in the warm tropical waters of the Atlantic. Conditions inside were becoming a living nightmare. The steel hull groaned under the immense pressure of the deep. The air was growing foul, filled with carbon dioxide. The temperature inside the metal tube climbed past 45 degrees Celsius, or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The crew was slowly suffocating in the sweltering heat. To make matters worse, their batteries were almost dead. Fresh water was nearly gone. And most critically, all radio contact with Moscow had been lost. They were alone, blind, and deaf to the world above, and what was happening in that world above. American warships were circling, dropping signaling depth charges. These were small, non-lethal explosives, meant only to force the submarine to surface. The Americans didn't know the submarine was armed with a nuclear weapon, and they certainly didn't intend to start a war. But down in the suffocating darkness of the B-59, the crew didn't know that all they felt were the concussive blasts hammering against their hull. Instruments rattled, lights flickered, for men already pushed to their physical and psychological limits, isolated from any command authority. These explosions felt like the opening shots of World War III. Under Soviet military doctrine, if a war had already started, their duty was clear. They were not to wait for confirmation. They were to strike back. Delay meant certain destruction, and they had the means to strike back with unimaginable force. Tucked away in the forward torpedo compartment was a special weapon, a TO nuclear torpedo. Its estimated yield was about 10 kilotons, roughly two-thirds the power of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, its target. The American naval fleet directly above them. A weapon like this was not a conventional firecracker. Detonating a nuclear torpedo against American warships would be an unambiguous act of war. The U.S. forces, already at DEFCON are the step right before nuclear war, were authorized to respond with overwhelming force if attacked. The chain reaction would have been instantaneous and unstoppable. Tactical retaliation against the Soviet subfleet, followed by a full-scale strategic nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. Cities across North America, Europe, and Russia would have been turned to radioactive ash within hours. Cold War simulations predicted tens, even hundreds of millions of dead within the first few days. But launching that torpedo wasn't simple. It required a specific protocol. 3 senior officers on board the B-59 had to unanimously agree. The captain of the sub, Valentin Savitsky, the political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, and the flotilla chief of staff, a man named Vasili Arkhipov. 2 out of 3 wasn't enough. All 3 had to turn their keys. In the hellish, pressure cooker environment of the command room, Captain Savitsky made his decision. He was convinced that depth charges meant war had already begun. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. He argued they had to launch. The political officer, Maslenikov, agreed with him. The keys were ready to turn. The fate of the world now rested entirely on the shoulders of the third man, Vasili Arkhipov. He hesitated. He listened to the captain's frantic arguments, felt the ship shudder from another nearby explosion, and chose to question the assumption. He had no confirmed orders from Moscow, no verified declaration of war. He calmly argued that the explosions weren't attacks, but signals, crude, terrifying signals, but signals nonetheless. He refused to give his consent. He would not turn his key. Because of that refusal, the launch sequence was aborted. The nuclear torpedo remained in its tube. The American fleet above continued its patrol, completely unaware of how close they and the rest of the world had just come to obliteration. The moment of supreme danger passed. Arkhipov's calculated restraint did more than just prevent a local naval battle. It kept the fragile thread of diplomacy between Kennedy and Khrushchev from snapping. With that channel still open, a deal was struck within 48 hours. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba. In return, the US secretly promised not to invade the island and to quietly remove its own Jupiter missiles from Turkey. The crisis, the closest humanity has ever come to self-destruction, was over. Civilization, against all odds, continued. You probably haven't heard the name Vasili Arkhipov. He didn't make headlines in 1902. His story remained a classified secret for decades. There were no medals, no public praise, no global recognition for the man who saved the world. He was simply an officer who, in a moment of unimaginable pressure, chose reason over reaction. History is usually written about bold action, about leaders who charged forward. But on that day, in that submarine, the world was saved by a bold refusal. For a few desperate minutes, inside a submerged steel coffin, global annihilation was not just a possibility. It was the most likely outcome. It was prevented because one man insisted on certainty in a situation defined by chaos. He possessed the authority to help end the world. He faced intense pressure to do so, and he said no, the Cold War would drag on for decades more. But thanks to him, the world did not end. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more hidden history. See you next time.